It's with great pleasure that I welcome you here to talk about Britain's favourite mammal, the hedgehog. We are joined this evening, and we'll be receiving presentations from two charities that have been at the forefront of conserving hedgehogs over the last 20 years, and that's the People's Trust for Endangered Species and the British Hedgehog Conservation Society. And together they've been working in partnership, fighting the cause for hedgehogs during that time. They've been able to identify the declines that hedgehogs are going through, but also they've done an awful lot of work trying to encourage the general public to become engaged with conservation programs to try and help hedgehogs, and you'll be hearing about some of that work this evening. They've also been at the forefront of funding research into hedgehog conservation. Everything from identifying how to survey for them, understanding the density and distribution a little bit better, and ultimately trying to understand what's driving the current declines. And to join the presenters this evening, we have a number of researchers from the Zoological Society of London who will be talking about some of their research that involves the wider public as well. So let me introduce your first speaker, which is Grace Johnson. Grace is the Hedgehog Officer for Hedgehog Street, a joint conservation campaign by the People's Trust for Endangered Species and the British Hedgehog Conservation Society. Grace studied zoology at the University of Leeds before undertaking volunteering roles in Britain, as well as throughout Southeast Asia and Australia. She started her career working at the Bat Conservation Trust and remains involved in bat work in a voluntary capacity as a trustee of a London bat group. Grace is passionate about British nature, with a particular interest in urban conservation and human attitudes to wildlife. She's been working on Hedgehog Street campaign for about 4 years. Please join me in welcoming Grace to the stage.
So I'm really happy to be here this evening. So I'm going to be talking all about hedgehog conservation and specifically the Hedgehog Street project. So just to start with a little bit of background information about Hedgehog Street, a couple of things that Richard said there. But first and foremost, it's a joint conservation campaign between two British wildlife charities, so as Richard mentioned, People's Trust for Endangered Species and the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. The project was launched back in 2011, and that was in response to quite severe declines that had been seen in British hedgehog populations. And also around the same time, there was research indicating that fragmented habitat was adversely affecting hedgehogs. So that was kind of how the campaign came about. Nigel's going to be talking a little bit more about the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, so I thought I'd give a bit of background on People's Trust for Endangered Species. Has anybody heard of them? Is there a little show of hands? Do we know? Yeah? Oh, that's good. Good to hear. So PTS are working with endangered species, both here in Britain and throughout the world. So we've got key species and habitats that we work with here in Britain, and we also give grants for international projects as well. So the website's there if anybody wants to find out more. In terms of the key species and habitats that we work with, that does of course include hedgehogs, the reason we're all here today. There's other mammals that they work with as well, so they work with water voles and with dormice, and they also run the national water vole and dormouse monitoring programs. And then more widely, they work with stag beetles, noble chafer beetles, stag beetles. There's a little bit of chat about stag beetles earlier on, so that's a really good one to mention this evening, because actually London's a really good stronghold for stag beetles. So if you do spot one this summer, do certainly log it on the PTS website. You know if you've seen one, because they're chunky, they're solid little beetles. And then more widely, in terms of our habitat work, we do a lot of hedgerow work, so bottom left there, and lots of sort of surveys, working with land managers and farmers, and we also work with traditional orchards and wood pasture as well. And then just a quick slide about the overseas grants. So we give grants to conservation partners all over the world. So a few examples of the species that we work with, but this has been going on for many years now, so there's lots of different partners that we work with, lots of different species all over the world. One thing I particularly wanted to flag is PTS's survey work. So they run 2 mammal surveys here in Britain, and this one's a good one to mention because this year's Living with Mammals survey just launched a few weeks ago, so it's been kind of, we've done a big campaign to raise awareness of that. And this is a survey where you can report mammals that you've seen in gardens and green spaces. And this is a really fantastic survey to get involved with. It's specifically geared towards urban areas, so whether you sort of survey in your garden or if you go out and do it in a local park, it gives us really good information about kind of urban populations of different mammals. So even if you don't see them, it might be that you've seen one on a wildlife camera, or if you've seen signs of them, so you might have seen droppings or sort of footprints or something like that. All of those things can be fed in. It gives us really good data on sort of hedgehogs and other mammals. So yeah, do certainly get involved in that. And even if you think you're not going to see anything, it's fine. Even if it's like a grey squirrel or whatever, it's still really good information for us to have. It gives us a picture of kind of what's happening with Britain's mammals. So that's my little plug, so do certainly get involved in that one. It's good fun. You'll see all these lovely species, and hopefully hedgehogs. So bringing it back to Hedgehog Street, I'll give a bit of an overview of the project. So it's quite a far-reaching project, and it's very much kind of developed over the 12 years that it's been running. So it sort of started as one thing, and then it's kind of evolved to take on lots of different things. So first and foremost, we do a lot of public engagement work, so talking to homeowners, garden owners, and really trying to engage with members of the public to try and raise awareness of the ways that people can help hedgehogs in gardens. Because what we're increasingly seeing is that gardens and urban areas are a real stronghold for hedgehogs. And actually our sort of towns and cities can be a bit of a haven for them. So really trying to raise awareness of that. We have hedgehog champions. Have I got any hedgehog champions in the room? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah. You'll all have to sign up when you go home tonight. So that's members of the public who've pledged online to help hedgehogs in their local area and wider community. So we've got over 120,000 registered hedgehog champions. So yeah, get involved if you're not already. So sort of branching that out a little bit, we want gardens to be really good habitat, but we also work with wider stakeholders. So land managers, so people like developers, farmers, ecologists, and sort of park and sort of countryside rangers, and really trying to sort of create and improve habitat for hedgehogs in lots of different areas. So to that end as well, we have a hedgehog ecology and land management course, which is that sort of picture of everyone standing in a park there. So that's, yeah, we get a real range of people. We did one in West London recently, and that was sort of attended by a lot of people from like local voluntary groups, like Ealing Wildlife Group, and then there was a lot of people who work in the park as well. So that was all about habitat creation and sort of mitigating any risks that hedgehogs might come across in parks. We liaise with our MP species champion, who's pictured at the top right-hand side there, so that's Chris Grayling. So an example of what we'd sort of be in touch with him about, we've been trying to increase the legal protection for hedgehogs, because they've got some protection, but it's not quite enough, it doesn't go as far as we'd like it to. So trying to kind of liaise with him and work towards achieving that increased legal protection. Supporting research as well, so that's one thing that Richard mentioned. So the PTS and BHPS fund a lot of hedgehog research. So that's been going on for a long time now, so there's been a lot of fantastic research, some of it we'll be hearing about tonight. And also, as part of Hedgehog Street, we try and support that research. So if, for example, a researcher wanted to find out more about how people are using gardens, as an example, we could send out a big survey to all of our hedgehog champions. We can kind of use the reach that we have to gather information for researchers as and when that's needed. Media work as well, so that's another great way to kind of get the message out. So we work, we've got sort of a PR consultant, and we've done well with our media. We've managed to have appearances on quite a lot of national media. So last year there was Hedgehogs and Hedgehog Street were featured on The One Show, on BBC Breakfast, BBC Radio 4, like lots of different sort of national media outlets, which is fantastic for us. That means that we can kind of get our message out to lots of different people, so that's always really good. And we work with a lot of local projects as well. There's a lot of fantastic volunteer projects all over Britain, so we work with them as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So in terms of ways to help, the good thing about Hedgehog is that it's nothing too expensive, it's not too much hard work to help them. You know, if you've got a garden, there's a lot of quite simple, straightforward changes that you can make that are going to, you know, have quite a big impact for hedgehogs. So I'll not go through all of them. I think a lot of them are fairly kind of self-explanatory. But one of the key pillars, really, of the Hedgehog Street campaign is this idea of connecting gardens together. So with Hedgehog Highways, it's basically got a picture there at the bottom. So it's small gaps in or under fences, 13 centimetres up and across, about the size of a CD case, just as a bit of a guide. And putting those in garden walls and fences, and basically that just allows hedgehogs to move through the environment. They can travel about a mile or even more in a single night as they're looking for food, looking for shelter, looking for mates. So really they cover quite a distance, but really if they're coming up against loads of garden borders, it's really going to restrict how much they can move. So it's really just kind of about opening up habitat and trying to sort of address the issue of habitat fragmentation, which is sadly one of the issues that they are facing in our urban and suburban areas. And then, yeah, once you've let them into the garden, it's time to kind of start thinking about lovely wildlife-friendly features. So things like log piles, leaf piles, compost heaps. What you're really trying to do is increase, get loads of insects in. So natural hedgehog food would be things like earthworms, beetles, earwigs, caterpillars, things like that. So really trying to increase those types of things in the garden. And then having nice kind of messy areas as well. So don't go too tidy with the garden. Let some of the grass grow a bit long, and that's going to provide nesting material for them as well. And actually on the highway front, just to mention a bit of research, there was a finding from a study at the University of Reading that found that 54% of hedgehog champions who put in a hedgehog highway did end up seeing an increase in hedgehogs. So it does work. And a quick video just to show a hedgehog highway in action. God, it's giant on that screen, isn't it? Giant hedgehog on the booth. So that's just to show if you put these gaps in fences, they do find them and they do use them, so these are really, really important. Other ways to help involve working with local groups, members of the community, and Jackie's actually here. I don't want to embarrass you, but yeah, I saw Jackie come in. She's pictured on the left-hand side. I didn't realize you'd be here, sorry. So there's lots of fantastic groups all over Britain, and what we try and do is work to enable and empower these groups to get involved and help hedgehogs locally. As much as we'd like to, you know, I can't go around and knock on every single door in Britain and ask them to help hedgehogs. So really this local buy-in from these fantastic groups is really, really important. And yeah, we just try and help them any way we can, really. So we've got leaflets, which are in that second picture there. So we can send out leaflets. We've got loads of sort of resources that you can download on the website, so like invitations to get neighbours involved. We've got resources for kids. You can download a talk for kids and for adults if you wanted to do sort of something to engage the local community. So yeah, lots of different things. And yeah, just kind of sharing information, because a lot of these groups are doing slightly different things, and one of them will have an idea for something, you know, if that's a good idea, we can pass it on to the other groups, and just trying to help them as much as we can and sort of get that real kind of strong, all the local connections, really. We do a lot of engagement campaigns as well, so I've got a few examples here. So they kind of range, we do a lot of, you know, it's got a lot of variety in terms of trying to sort of reach people in as many different ways as possible. So we run a lot of engagement awareness campaigns. So prime example of that would be Hedgehog Awareness Week, which was last week. So that's very much, as it says on the tin, it's all about raising awareness. So there's a lot of stuff going on social media, lots of kind of sharing of tips and ideas and competitions and things like that. And also we ran an online event last week. So that's a really good example of a sort of quite a widespread awareness campaign. Another example would be, so I mentioned earlier that we're wanting to try and increase the legal protection for hedgehogs. So a couple of years back we asked all of our hedgehog champions to write to their MPs to ask them to get involved in this process. So that was another one where we were kind of asking people to do something, getting people involved, and it had quite a nice sort of tangible outcome, hopefully, if we can increase the legal protection. We also ran a campaign last year looking for Britain's biggest hedgehog street, and that was quite a nice one because it was a bit of fun. It was like competition, who can have, you know, the most connected gardens in one street in Britain. So it was a bit of a light touch campaign. It was trying to get people involved, but it also did have a good kind of conservation outcome because we were getting a lot of people putting a lot of effort into putting these highways in streets. And the winner was a street in Nottinghamshire in Keyworth, and they had 42 hedgehog highways on one street, which was fantastic, and they had a thriving hedgehog population as a result. Another example of a campaign we've run was linking to the hedgehog housing census. So that was the same research that I mentioned before from Reading University. So that was a researcher, Abby Gazard, who was looking at hedgehogs in the urban environment. and she was wanting to find out a little bit more about how hedgehogs use these hedgehog houses that we put in the garden. So we sent this survey around and kind of got all the information back. I think Nigel's going to talk a little bit more about that later on. And then finally, in the middle, cakes, that was purely just an engagement campaign. We had our 10th birthday 2 years ago, and we did a birthday cake competition, so we had all these weird and wonderful hedgehog cakes, well, not the cakes sent in, but the pictures sent in. But yeah, that was just quite a nice, like, light touch campaign. It wasn't super conservation related, but it was just to raise awareness of Hedgehog Street, and yeah, just engage our hedgehog champions and just have a bit of fun, really. So that was the winning cake there. There's like little mini hoglet cakes in the background as well. And that was judged by Kim Joy from the Great British Bake Off. So we had expert help with that, so that was pretty cool. Another part of our work is the big hedgehog map. So this is records of hedgehogs. So if you've been out and about and you see one, if it's alive or if it is sadly dead or roadkill, you can log your sighting on the big hedgehog map. It doesn't really give us numbers. We can't kind of say, oh, that means there's this many hedgehogs in Britain, but it gives us quite good distribution data across the UK. We've had over 150,000 records submitted since the map was started in 2015. You can see kind of on the left-hand side, it's sort of quite spread across. You'd need to really zoom in to kind of see where those individual sightings were. And we do treat that as biological data, so we share that with the NBN Atlas and various local biological record centres as well. So another key part of our work is the State of Britain's Hedgehogs report. So this is a report that's produced every few years by PTS and BHPS, and we pull survey data from lots of different places, lots of different wildlife surveys, bring it all together and really try and have a detailed look about how hedgehog populations are faring in Britain. So the first one of these was back in 2011, around the time that Hedgehog Street was set up. And that found that a quarter of the population had been lost in the last 10 years, so since around the millennium. So quite worrying declines that had been seen in Britain's hedgehogs. The next report was 2015. So that one was quite an interesting one. So that found that since the millennium, rural populations had declined by at least a half, and urban populations by up to a third. So we're starting to see this sort of disparity between urban and rural populations. And then in 2018, it was sort of more of the same. It was this, in rural areas, sadly, they are really struggling and they're continuing to decline. But in urban areas, that decline's starting to slow down a little bit. So it was a little tiny bit of good news, but not, it was not quite there yet. But it was, yeah, this sort of increasing disparity between urban and rural, which was quite interesting. And then most recently, we produced the report last year. So it came out around this time last year, I think. So again, it was more of the same. It's this increasing difference between urban and rural areas. So in urban areas, we're seeing the picture of a stable population that's starting to show signs of recovery. And in rural areas, the populations are sadly still declining. They're remaining low, with declines of between 30 and 75% nationally in different areas. So we had to be a little bit careful with that because it was a slight bit of good news, but it's really important to view that in the context of what had gone before, which was really quite widespread declines. It's kind of, they were up here and then they've declined, and there's a slight uptick, but they're not really back up to the numbers that they should be. But it's a little bit of good news, and actually obviously we can't say it's because of Hedgehog Street, but I mean, certainly that's a big awareness campaign that's primarily focused on urban and suburban areas, so it's just quite interesting, there's more and more people signing up to that, more and more people helping them, and it does, it is helping, at least in part. We can't sort of directly say it's because of that, but certainly it must be having a bit of an impact. Just a quick one to show, we released the report with a press release and we did an awareness campaign, and just to show some of the media outlets that we were featured in, which was fantastic. So it was sort of read quite far and wide, which was brilliant. And we always put a call to action in there as well. So we were kind of saying, this is what's happening with hedgehogs. If you want to get more involved, if you want to help them in your street, your garden, your local area, this is where you can find more information. So a couple of things that we're working on at the moment and sort of moving forward, just to finish off. We are currently putting together a national hedgehog conservation strategy. So we previously had a strategy, of course, that we've been working to, but the thinking with this one was that we want to kind of broaden it out and we want to bring in wider stakeholders. So we've worked previously with a lot of researchers, a lot of conservation organisations, but we thought it was really important to get buy-in from people like developers, people from the travel and transport industries and infrastructure, because we want to get as much buy-in into this strategy as possible and try and make it as wide-reaching as possible. So it's sort of cooking away in the background, so hopefully we should be able to share that quite soon. We're also working on a campaign to lobby fencing suppliers for more hedgehog-friendly options. So there are some products on the market which are basically a gravel board with a ready-made hedgehog highway cut out of it, which is fantastic. It's absolutely brilliant. But there's not many of those, and we really want to see more of them. You know, we want it to be, if you're putting a new fence in, at the forefront of your mind is this, you've got to think about hedgehogs. So we just want to try and get them, these national companies to try and have more hedgehog-friendly options and raise awareness as part of that. And then finally, we are working on a national hedgehog monitoring programme. We've got a few of the sort of key players here today who've been chatting all things monitoring today. So that's a 3-year pilot, and hopefully that's going to give us some really good detailed information of hedgehog populations all over Britain. And that'll be using camera traps as well, so similar method to the London HogWatch project, which we'll be hearing about later. And yeah, that's everything. So just a few websites there and things. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. I don't know if there's any questions.
We have time for one question from the audience. There will be a panel question session at the end. Thanks, Chris. We have time for one question. If you just wait for the microphone, please. Thank you.
Hi, I particularly like hedgehogs. I had 2 living under my shed, but terribly unfortunately I came out one morning and found one flattened on the road. I'm surprised really that you have less growth in the country, because there's less risk of cars flattening them and plenty of food for them to eat natural greenery and bugs and things. So why aren't they increasing in the country?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's sort of the opposite way than what you think. You think that out in the wider countryside they've got all this space to roam, that's going to be a lot better for them. But it's very much, they're facing different pressures in different areas. So what you've got in rural areas is quite sort of intensive agriculture. So you'd think that there'd be loads of kind of space and shelter for them, but it's often not the case. I think it does vary quite a lot. But what you've got in urban areas is a lot of very sort of proactive people who are helping them. And actually gardens can be really good, they're almost like a micro habitat. If you've got a really wildlife-friendly garden, you've got that as a nice little island for them. And then if you have a few of those joined up, that can really make an impact. And I think on the roads front, we've got Richard here who's researching roads, but I mean, I think rural roads are almost more difficult because when you've got a really busy dual carriageway or something, all of the noise and the lights kind of deters them. They don't sort of try and cross those ones as much. But in rural areas, you'll have a road that's really quiet for sort of potentially hours at a time, and then one car will really fly down really fast. So it's almost more of a risk because they'll sort of start crossing it thinking it's fine, and then they are still really risky. But I mean, certainly there's a lot of, there's kind of hotspots in terms of roadkill, but yeah, it's kind of the opposite way around than you'd think. But
People be eating the farmers' crops and things out in the country. I think there'd be plenty of different things for them to eat, but a secondary question, can you go and adopt a hedgehog and take it home and put it in your garden?
We wouldn't really recommend that. It's better, they're such a widespread species and they can thrive in a lot of different habitats, so we wouldn't be saying to kind of stop putting them in different places. It's better to try and improve the habitat and try and link areas together, whether it's gardens, parks, whatever. Because if you were going to do that, you need a lot of hedgehogs to have like a viable population. If you just bring one into an area where there's no hedgehogs, it's not really going to do anything. So we wouldn't really recommend kind of moving them in, but certainly I think we hear from a lot of people who think that they don't have hedgehogs, but then they'll kind of see them one night. So they're very widespread. So you might be surprised as to where you find them.
Thank you for the question. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker this evening is Nigel Reeve. Nigel studied hedgehog behaviour and ecology for his PhD at Royal Holloway College and has been involved with hedgehogs ever since. He's written a book on hedgehogs back in 1994. He became a lecturer and researched hedgehogs at Roehampton University from 1982 to 2002. And from 2002 to 2013, he was head of ecology for the Royal Parks in London. He's now retired, but remains active in a 10-year study of hedgehogs in Regent's Park. And from October 2019, he became a trustee of the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. So please join me in welcoming Nigel to the stage.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Richard. I'm going to get straight on with the talk because I've got a lot to say. Based in Shropshire, the British Hedgehog Preservation Society was founded in 1982 by the late Major Adrian Coles, MBE, and he campaigned to have escape ramps fitted into cattle grids. Here he is in his Chelsea pensioners uniform at the Hedgehog Street Garden at the RHS Hampton Court Flower Show in 2014. Sadly, he died in 2017, aged 86, and he's much missed. We celebrated our 40th birthday in 2022, and we have now over 11,500 supporters. They're all helping to support this much loved animal. And while we just have the opportunity, I just wanted to very briefly mention the Hedgehog Street Garden at Hampton Court Palace Flower Show. This was a show garden of 3 terraced house gardens, all different in their approach to being good for hedgehogs, all benefiting hedgehogs in the different ways, and all linked to allow hedgehogs to move through. The garden was very well received, received a gold medal and the People's Choice Award, and 20,000 leaflets were given out, which shows you the kind of reach of these events. It gained a lot of celebrity interest and was featured on Gardeners World. The BHPS is a UK registered charity. Our vision is to have a sustainable, thriving hedgehog population in the UK. And our mission, excuse the wordiness of this, is to protect the future and welfare of native British hedgehogs and to help people better to understand and respect wildlife through education, conservation, and the funding of cutting-edge research focused on hedgehogs. And when we talk about hedgehogs, we're talking about the Western European hedgehog, Erinaceus europaeus, not the pet hedgehogs that some people have. Our chief executive is Faye Vass, and our president is Dr. Pat Morris, MPE, who is a very well-known person in hedgehog circles. Our website is a great source of information about our work and campaigns, and it's easily found. You just put in BHPS or British Hedgehog Preservation Society, and your search engine will find it immediately. Our campaigns, Grace already mentioned some of this. Hedgehog Awareness Week is run every year, and it was in fact last week. It's a very good way of raising awareness. Last Thursday, Hedgehog Street hosted Tom Morehouse in an online evening webinar about his recent new book, Ghosts in the Hedgerow, which is a sort of whodunit for hedgehogs. Over 45 posters and leaflets are freely downloadable from the BHPS website, with messaging about avoiding hazards or advice on helping hedgehogs. And we send these out to carers, garden centres and so on for distribution to the public, as well as distributing them ourselves at events. Every day we receive many phone calls, emails, letters asking for advice on helping hedgehogs. We provide information to the public about the conservation and welfare of wild hedgehogs by improving their habitat and reducing hazards. So you can see on the left-hand side, creating a wildlife garden, and then in the middle, things you can do to help hedgehogs. But we are not a hedgehog rescue organisation, but we do offer first aid advice to inquirers with sick or injured hedgehogs, and we maintain a list of about 590 independent rehabilitators in the UK, so that we can hopefully find a local organisation for the inquirer to take their hedgehog to. We recognise the importance of the work of hedgehog rescue and rehabilitation centres in helping and caring for tens of thousands of hedgehogs each year. And as part of our work, we offer support and advice and training to centres around the country. You can see that we have such leaflets, the simple guide to worms in the middle here, and best practice guidelines for people wanting to care for and rehabilitate hedgehogs. When someone joins our directory of 590 institutions, sort of organisations, we can provide a heat pad for them for free if they don't have one, and for recently set up rescue centres, we pay half the fee for the Vale course on first aid and care of rehabilitation of hedgehogs. And Grace has already mentioned the hedgehog ecology and management for practitioners, or the HEMP course as we call it. And these are just some of the booklets that we produced with Hedgehog Street for free download from our websites, respectively. We currently have 8 patrons, there they are, and other celebrity supporters who help with our messaging and raise our profile. Just like to particularly mention Alistair McGowan, who gave his fee for appearing on BBC Celebrity Mastermind very recently, and I'm very pleased to say he won as well. Another person who supports us is Hugh Warwick. He's an ecologist and author of several books, including some on hedgehogs. He's a spokesperson for the BHPS and helps us with media appearances and advocacy generally. There's a free 45-minute talk by him on the BHPS website that you can just watch whenever you like. And he's also helped us champion hedgehog highways using a change.org petition, which has attracted well over 1 million signatures so far. And he's also helped us broker a partnership with the Vistry Group, which includes Bogus Homes and Linden, to install hedgehog highways from spring 2020 onwards. And a video about this featuring Hugh is available on the internet. And again, very easy to find. All you have to do is search for hedgehogs, hedgehog highways and Vistry, and you'll find it. Also through our linkage with the Hedgehog Street programme, we have hedgehog highways agreements with other builders like Russell Armour Homes in Cumbria and Lancashire, and Taylor Wimpey, which has a partnership with Hedgehog Street and Buglife. Strimmers, mowers, brush cutters all inflict serious and sometimes fatal injuries to hedgehogs and other wildlife that's found in the undergrowth. And the BHPS has campaigned to have stickers put on all such machinery, reminding workers to check for hedgehogs before using the equipment. And we've got 150 organisations plus signed up to putting such stickers on their equipment, including many councils, golf clubs, land management companies, tool hire companies, and so on. So what they do is they receive for free stickers from the BHPS, and then they send us photographs of them in use, and we add them to our roll of honour. Just to mention Hedgehog Street again, we work so much with Hedgehog Street, it's not possible to divorce ourselves entirely. But her role supports many initiatives, and this includes some projects that we've had in the recent past, where we had funded hedgehog officer posts in partnership with the Wildlife Trusts in both in Warwickshire, in Suffolk, and in London as well. And these were incredibly valuable engagement projects. And after the project was ended, many of the functions of these people became embedded within Wildlife Trusts where they were employed. We also have the Hedgehog Friendly Campus project led by Joe Wilkinson. It's funded by the BHPS. The programme began in 2018, and what we have is university, college and school campuses signed up to this project, they put forward volunteer hedgehog ambassadors to work excuse me, within the campus to deliver a whole range of initiatives. And you can see here that over 108 universities have registered so far, all achieving different levels of accreditation. Schools use the activity pack that's produced, habitat improvements, tree plantings, habitat piles, and hedgehog houses. Litter picking to remove dangerous litter from the campus. In 2022, over 1,500 litter pickers collected almost 1,000 bags of litter. And the project has delivered over 200 webinars, talks and workshops, including survey workshops and the hemp course, which gets another mention. And it's planning to move on to future targets, including results packs for primary schools and trialling also a secondary school pack. Another cool thing that you can just watch on the internet is the Hedgehog Close video. This is a 2-minute animation film made for the BHPS by Zest Productions and narrated by Gordon Buchanan. And this won both a silver medal at the Charity Film Awards and also the People's Choice Award, and was selected also as a finalist for the prestigious Wild Screen Festival. And it tackles several key issues for hedgehogs in gardens and has been a very successful addition to the education pack, particularly in schools. And you can find it easily just by using a search engine to find Hedgehog Close. I'd like to finish the presentation by talking about some published research that's been done. Now, Grace already mentioned the work on urban hedgehogs by Abigail Gazzard, a PhD at Reading University, working with Dr. Phil Baker. And she carried out a range of different studies, including very detailed tracking of urban hedgehogs and citizen science work. And she looked at habitat selection on a very fine scale, connectivity between gardens and habitat patches, feeding and winter activity, and has produced several open access papers. You can find open access papers just by using a Google Scholar or just searching for the titles or the authors. So one example of these has been the use of nest boxes. And she found that nest boxes may be used by hedgehogs at all times of year for nesting and hibernating, and also for breeding, but less commonly for breeding than the other uses. Now the data are quite complex, but the boxes are more likely to be used if they're placed under shelter with the entrance not facing outwards, and that's a useful, practical point. If it's placed on hard standing and or within 5 metres of a building, if there's bedding available or supplementary food, and if there's access between the front and the back gardens. Now these are things that are practically helpful in helping people make the best use of things like hedgehog houses. It shows the value of them. Also, another published example is the study of robotic lawnmowers. And this is by Dr. Sophie Lund Rasmussen and her colleagues. She's at the University of Oxford, but also at Aalborg University in Denmark. And she tested different models of robotic lawnmowers on dead hedgehogs, I hasten to tell you, and they varied greatly in their ability to detect and avoid hurting hedgehogs. Technical features such as pivoting blades and skid plates and front-wheel drive were features of lawnmowers that made them safer for hedgehogs. And Sophie's work is continuing with Husqvarna and Stihl to develop standardised safety tests and to develop more hedgehog-friendly mowers. Some BHDS-funded research that's actually ongoing at the moment is a study of plastic ingestion by hedgehogs by Emily Thrift, a PhD student at the University of Sussex, with Professor Fiona Matthews. And previous work by Emily has already found plastics in fecal samples from various small mammals, and the hedgehogs have the highest rates of exposure. And ongoing work is to determine which types of plastics are found, their origin, how they are consumed, which organs they accumulate in, and what the possible health consequences of this exposure to plastic may be. And a final example of ongoing research, again, Dr. Sophie Lund Rasmussen, the microbiome of hedgehogs in the UK and Denmark. That began early this year, and she's been working with colleagues internationally to examine the bacterial and fungal communities of hedgehogs in Denmark and the UK, and looking for disease-carrying microbes. So she's going to look at their incidence, their geographical distribution, and may help target treatments and identify potential zoonoses, in other words, diseases that can be transferred from hedgehogs to people as well. Okay, so just to finish there, I just thought I'd mention the next speakers. The London HogWatch, you'll hear more about this from Dr. Chris Carbone and Kate Scott-Gatty in the next presentation, but this is work that we are supporting. And thank you for listening. I hope that's given you some indication of some of the work that we do. There's plenty of stuff that I haven't been able to mention, and I hope that people who I haven't mentioned aren't too fed up about that. Right, thank you.
One question from the audience?
Hello, we've currently been doing within our university research, we had independent projects. What our tutor group had was about snake fungal disease and how rattlesnake populations with shared dens can have increased transmission of snake fungal disease. Has there been much research into providing hedgehog houses to ensure zoonotic disease between humans that are looking after it, but also disease transmission between different hedgehogs? I know hedgehogs can use 4 to 5 different hibernation dens per winter. How can we ensure that there's reduction in transmission of disease between them when they share it and also when they travel between different dens?
Right, well, I don't know of any work that's been specifically done on this on hedgehog houses, but I can tell you that nest sharing in the wild is widespread. Or what I mean by nest sharing is not them all bundling in together, but sequentially using the same nests. So I don't think it's going to be a unique and new thing that hedgehogs move from one, hedgehogs may be subject to that kind of disease transmission. But I don't know of any work specifically about that, unless anybody else does. Apparently not. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Okay, next up we have a double act. We have Chris Carbone. Chris is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Zoology and conservationist with expertise in predator-prey relationships and animal ecology. He established the London HogWatch project, a citizen science-based initiative aimed at understanding and preserving hedgehog populations across London, and is dedicated to promoting conservation efforts and public involvement in science and engagement with local nature. Shall I also introduce Kate as well?
Please go on.
And he will be joined at the end of Chris's little presentation by Kate Scott-Gatty. There she is. Kate is the project manager for the London HogWatch project, and she first joined ZSL in 2019 as part of the Living Planet Index team. She has a background in biodiversity monitoring and conservation. She's also passionate about public engagement, having previously worked in behaviour change and business engagement in sustainable transport.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Yes, so we're going to do a double act for this talk. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the background of the project, and Kate's going to follow up talking about some of the results that we found in recent years. Right, so our talk is going to focus on the London HogWatch project. And London HogWatch has been running since 2016. We've been working with a range of partners to use camera traps to come up with sort of up-to-date information to help us identify the status and location of hedgehog strongholds across Greater London. And the idea behind this is that with a greater knowledge, up-to-date knowledge, and kind of robust knowledge of the distributions, we can inform conservation efforts and work with people to improve conservation of hedgehogs in the capital. In 3 words, then, we would say that we first focus on detection, that's identifying the existing populations. And then having found some evidence of hedgehogs in an area, we can get local groups to get excited about it and improve the protection of local populations. Ultimately, though, a longer-term strategy for saving hedgehogs in a capital like London would be to think about connectivity. Connectivity of hedgehog populations through green corridors throughout the capital. But also, I think it's very important that we connect people interested in hedgehogs too, because a lot of people know about a local population in their local neighborhood, but don't know about the wider area or other people, and there's less communication between interested groups, and we feel like hedgehog conservation could greatly benefit from bringing together interested parties and working with them. So since so who are we? We're a small research team. We've got Kate Scott-Gatty, who's going to be following us. We've got 2 research technicians as well. Izzy and Chloe in the audience there. Say hi. There we go, in the middle. And we've got myself. We've got a range of different partners. We are funded, our core funding comes from the BHPS, and Nigel has also acknowledged. It's really vital that we're really grateful from the BHPS for getting us that kind of core funding. We also get funding short term from other groups like the Southern London Partnership, Rewild London Fund, from Mayor of London Fund as well. We've worked with a range of different corporate partners and parks and land managers and things. And I'm funded by the UKRI, just mentioned that. We have many collaborators, and critical to our project is the volunteers that we work with who help us to do this work. For example, one particular one is where we're doing the really big surveys. We sometimes can get as many as 60 people together to help us with these surveys, and it's really important. It allows us to get a lot of camera traps distributed, say, across a very large park, all in one go. We worked a lot with different friends groups, NGOs, and environmental groups. We've also worked a lot, of course, with PTS as well. We have a lot of university partners, and occasionally do work with local schools as well. So far, we've done surveys in roughly about half of London boroughs. We cover areas of parks, nature reserves. We've also been doing a lot of work recently with allotments. I think Kate will, and private gardens. Kate will be talking a little bit about that. And recently developing work with large corporate partners like Network Rail. Oops, just press 2 buttons there. So last year we had a very good year. The project started out from very, very modest beginnings to start with. We're now, last year though, we've sort of increased the capacity over the last couple of years. And last year is typical of sort of higher level capacity. We put out over 600 cameras doing nearly 30 surveys. The cameras record a huge amount of information. It's up to 15 to 20,000 images per placement, camera placement. And over the course of a year like this, we'll accumulate something like 3 million photographs. So lots of information there. And we surveyed 2 new boroughs, Ealing and Burton, and had 172 volunteers. Now these volunteers are not just kind of looking at our website and spending a little bit of time visiting the site. We're getting people out and about, putting out cameras, getting mucky, helping us with our surveys, and that's really a good, fun, and nice activity for people to get involved in. We've also, in addition to the camera trap work, used citizen science data, a bit like what Grace was describing earlier with data from PTS and BHPS, but also Mammal Society and Giggle, and NBN. And we've used this to try to come up with statistically defined sort of habitats that are good for hedgehogs, focused on London. These data are really abundant, especially in urban centres like a place like London, but they're also difficult data sets to work with because they're opportunistic sightings that people send in, and we've got to work out ways of correcting for sort of biases and observer effort, and lack of any kind of absence of animal data, which is really important in the kind of work that, like this, kind of species modeling work. One of my PhD students, Jessica Turner, produced this lovely predictive map of the hedgehog hotspots around Greater London using these data. What you see is a sort of donut effect where there's understandably very few hedgehog sightings or low habitat suitability for hedgehogs in the centre of London, where it's too built up really to support them. But around the edge, there's sort of a donut area of higher habitat quality suitability for the species where you have more residential gardens. And this sort of work shows that residential gardens are extremely important for hedgehogs. It also interestingly showed some cool spots around the edge of Greater London, and that could either be due to the presence of badgers or also maybe some agricultural areas which are maybe less suitable somehow. This work was followed up by a master's student, Uwe Fung, who did a really nice, extended this work, looking at other habitat suitability of 3 other iconic mammals, foxes, squirrels, and badgers. And the interesting thing there, again, was that while badgers and hedgehogs both show that kind of donut shape effect, of not very many of these animals in central London, actually foxes and squirrels actually had the highest habitat suitability in the centre of London, and it kind of tailed off towards the outer edge. So they show just different levels of ability to live in urban environments across these species, which is very informative. And we did a kind of analysis, which I'm not going to show you today, which just shows from the centre of the edge how habitat suitability changed over time, over space. So I talked about the numbers of photographs that we get in these large surveys. And it's one of the big challenges that we have. How can we process this kind of amounts of data that we get? And so we're beginning to use more and more effectively over the last year, certainly, machine learning tools to help us sift through the data. So here's just my kind of summary. It's a guesstimate of the numbers. They're not really scientifically robust numbers. They're just kind of impressions that you get from one of our big surveys. Most of our photographs are of people, because people are one of the most common visitors to the parks. And we do try to keep our cameras low, because hedgehogs aren't very high. We don't need them to be. And it also helps to minimize the kind of full-body photographs that we get of people. So it's mostly of people's ankles and shoes and things like that. But and then we get a lot of blanks because vegetation moves around in bushy areas. So there's like 3/4 of the images that we don't really actually need for our surveys. And that leaves the rest, something like maybe 20% of the images are of species like foxes and a range of different bird species, other urban mammals too. And hedgehogs represent only about 0.01% of the hedgehogs, so 1 in every sort of 1,000. Every 1,000. Yeah, so it is a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. And when we talk about shot in the dark, it is, we have to, finding these and getting data on the hedgehogs is a little bit tricky at times. But greatly improved by the use of machine learning approaches. The other thing that's a big challenge for us is broadening our reach. There is huge potential in this work to reach a wide audience across London and get people involved and excited about their local wildlife. And so we've been trying to develop programs which explore working with schools, kids, and getting them to put out camera traps, getting to learn a bit about local wildlife, get into the parks and everything like that. And that's something that we're hoping to expand as funding permitting. And then the other big interesting thing would be to continue developing our partnership with corporate partners, because there's huge incentive for land managers to increase biodiversity, right? We have all these government, at the moment, government initiatives to stabilize or increase biodiversity across these their land areas, and this provides a really nice opportunity to work with them as partners. And also, we would like to broaden our access to other councils which maybe have a little less funding to get us to working with them as well. So part of that would be to try to expand our coverage across Greater London. So I think with that, it's over to Kate. You've got your good.
Hi. So now I'm going to talk about some of our main findings and also some conservation projects that we've been working on recently. So one of our main findings that we have is that roads and other large urban infrastructure are acting as barriers to dispersal for London's hedgehogs. Like on this, is it the clicker? Yeah. Like here you see we often find on one side of the main road we find hedgehogs and on the other side we don't find them. And we found that all over London, habitat fragmentation and population isolation are a central threat to London's hedgehogs. So we like to, each year, survey new areas to get a better understanding of distribution across the whole city, but we also like to continually monitor our hedgehog strongholds that we've already identified. So the recent results, which are sad, are that Regent's Park population and also Barnes Common and Putney Lower have actually been declining, the hedgehog population is declining there. However, encouragingly, our most recent survey of Hampstead Heath, which is actually our biggest hedgehog stronghold that we found to date, has had loads of hedgehog activity, as you can see on the right there. And so this indicates that there's a continued widespread population here, which is great news. And another key finding is how important garden habitats are. So we actually didn't used to do garden surveys. This started in 2020 during lockdown. Because we couldn't survey parks, this actually, oh, I don't have a picture anymore. Chris's favourite development of the project is these coloured bags, where you can put a camera in there already on, and then what I would do is cycle around my local area, put a camera on people's doorsteps, and then they would take the camera outside, just take them out of the bag, strap them to a tree, and they'd start monitoring. And then at the end, they'd put them back on the doorstep and collect them back again. And the amount of hedgehog activity that we recorded was really amazing, and so we haven't looked back from that and have been doing garden surveys ever since. This is over a 2-week period, a hedgehog in those initial lockdown surveys of a hedgehog going in and out of a hedgehog hole, showing how important hedgehog highways are. And we often find that there are more sightings of hedgehogs in gardens than in neighbouring parks. Like, for example, our Kingston survey last year, we found hedgehog activity in 1/3 of the garden cameras, but only in 3% of the park cameras. And across London, all our results show how important these garden allotment cameras are, how important habitats they are for London's hedgehogs, which really kind of shows how local residents can make an impact on hedgehog conservation. So, how do we put our findings into conservation? We work with a lot of different groups. In urban areas, there's such a high density of different stakeholders, different land users, land owners, land managers. So really connecting up people is critical to connecting up wildlife. So the kind of groups that we work with are local environmental groups, local residents, local businesses, local councils. Our work with councils, we feed into their biodiversity action plans, and also our data help inform decision making and their management strategies. And then we're currently also working with local environmental groups like Wild Chiswick and Ealing Wildlife Group on their hedgehog highway schemes. So here we use camera traps to get an idea of the hedgehog distribution in the local area, and then this information will help them target their hedgehog highway schemes to where it's going to be most beneficial for the population and also most effective use of resources as well. And another project that we worked on last year was some money from the London's Rewild London Fund, the Mayor's Rewild London Fund. And the aim of this project was to kind of link SYNC managers. So SYNC is a site of interest for nature conservation, and we linked up 13 different SYNC managers with conservation groups to discuss hedgehog conservation. And another key thing we were trying to do was identify habitat corridors. So how we did this was we used our normal camera trap surveys, and then we also created an online historical knowledge survey for residents to fill in. And then we supplemented this data with Hedgehog Street's Big Hedgehog Map that Grace talked about earlier, which is a really useful source of data. And so combining the citizen science data with camera trap data, we were able to identify 5 potential hedgehog corridors. And our partners are carrying on this work. Heath Hands and the Heath and Hampshire Society are going on and engaging people and also working on developing these green corridors in the areas that we identified. Another exciting partnership was with Network Rail, and we did this with ZSL's monitoring and technology team and also Instant Wild. So we were wanting to kind of understand and improve railside areas as movement corridors. So we think that in urban areas, railway lines could be really important movement corridors for some species. And we did find evidence of foxes and badgers and hedgehogs on our cameras that we had on railway lines, which was really interesting. We also uploaded images onto Instant Wild, which is where you can upload your data and the public can go through and identify what's in the images, which is a really great public engagement tool. And we're really hoping to extend this work with them this year. As one of the largest landowners in the country, we really think that this partnership with ZSL could create really big conservation impact. And that's a few of our projects that we've been working on. But yeah, the future for us for this year, for whenever, we are hoping to, as Chris mentioned earlier, we get so many photos, there's so much data, so we're really trying to work on our machine learning to help that process, but also wanting to increase the amount of data we're putting on these like public processing platforms, because I think it's a really nice way for local residents to go on there and be able to go through and identify species in their local parks and really connect them to their local nature. We're also wanting to expand our historical knowledge survey to London-wide, which we'll be doing very soon, so do please look out for that and fill that in. And yeah, so the project has grown a lot in the last 7 years, I guess now, and we really think that the project has grown in its outputs and social networks, and we're really in a good position now to be able to inform management strategies and bring the relevant groups together to conserve London's hedgehogs. And the project really provides a good way and a good basis for kind of reaching diverse audiences and connecting people to local nature and also engaging them in local conservation as well. Also, hedgehogs are a really great flagship species, so often where we find the most hedgehogs, we actually find the most biodiverse areas, we find the most species there. So by protecting hedgehogs, we're protecting so many other species as well, which is really great. And that's a few of our projects for this year. Hopefully this will grow. And thanks to our partners and funders that help us do the work that we do, and our ever-growing staff and team. And yeah, thanks for listening. This is our links to our social media.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Kate, for the informative presentation. We have one question from the floor, Kate and Chris.
Hi, thank you very much. It's all very, very interesting. I'm trying to sort of imagine where you might come across opposition to hedgehogs, but if you ever do, in terms of your public engagement, what sort of strategies, what are the common themes if there is, ever is any opposition, and what sort of strategies do you use to sort of bring people together and overcome any opposition to introducing any sort of hedgehog policy?
I think I haven't come across any adversity to hedgehogs per se. Interestingly, actually, I know that in France they see hedgehogs as pests and carry fleas, and they have really negative kind of connotations with them. But I think in the UK it's really the opposite, and most people really love them. I think the only thing I can really think of is people are can be quite against putting a hedgehog hole in their garden, and that's because they say rats will come in, or foxes, or and that can be quite tricky, and that's quite hard to overcome. I don't know if Grace might have some ideas on how you do that. Do you have any thoughts, Grace?
Yes, so I agree with Kate that the hedgehog is pretty universally popular. I have run into one or two people who don't like the fact that they can hunt ground nesting birds, eggs and things like that. But generally a very popular species. I think one of the neat things about the HogWatch project is that the camera footage that you get is very kind of a good material to inspire people to appreciate nature more generally, not just hedgehogs, but anything else that we get in front of the camera, and to inform them. So I think that's a great way of reducing barriers, is just showing them showing the experience, allowing them to experience wildlife, and then getting excited about it, and that often opens doors, I think.
Great, thank you. Don't run away. We're
We're
going to have 10 minutes of open questions for the panel. So I'm going to ask the other Nigel and Grace to sit up front, and we'll take some other questions, more general questions. This gentleman here has been waiting a while, so you can kick us off.
Yeah, thanks everybody for a fascinating series of talks. Just wondering, have you noticed any sort of bounce in hedgehog numbers as a result of lockdown? You know, because as you know, there was a lot less traffic on the roads in all areas, less activity. Has there been a sort of like COVID bounce for hedgehogs?
I get asked this quite a lot. It was so during lockdown, I was getting a lot of inquiries from people saying, you know, I haven't seen them for years, and suddenly they're all in the garden. But it was more a case that people were outside in their gardens and seeing them. So it's quite hard to kind of balance out. You know, we had a lot of sightings logged on. You know, the big hedgehog map, for example. And living with mammals, the PTS survey had like record numbers of people taking part, which was brilliant. But it's a bit like, was there more hedgehogs, or was it more just because there's more people out kind of in the garden seeing them? So I think we don't quite know at this point. But it would be interesting maybe when a few more years have gone by, just to kind of have a look at how things have changed kind of on the national surveys, because it's quite an interesting, it was obviously such an interesting time. Like we say, there was fewer cars on the roads, and yes, but then it was a very hot year as well. It was like a really hot, dry summer, so that might have impacted as well. So there was a few different factors at play, I think, but certainly I wonder if it was just a lot of people out seeing them more.
And as to all this rural decline, is it associated in areas with intensive farming, including nighttime harvesting? What effect is that having on hedgehog populations? Especially the harvester, I imagine, is like it's a strimmer on wheels. It can just kill anything in its way.
I could try and answer that. I mean, I don't know specifically about nighttime harvesting, but intensive management of farmland does reduce biodiversity and does change the nature of the landscape, so that it's less well connected, and also there's a general loss of hedgerows associated with intensive farming, and hedgerows are important resources for hedgehogs. They use them to move, they use them to nest, they use them to forage. There are so many potential impacts of farming if it's done intensively that yes, there's almost certainly a negative effect there. But well, before I finish on that, just be careful not to be rough on farmers. They're doing an important job and very often being told how to do it as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Could I also add, in terms of the COVID sort of impacts on hedgehogs, I would argue that a lot of the park managers would say that the numbers of people in the park shot up quite dramatically over COVID and post-COVID. So that's great in a lot of ways, but it could also mean that there's some element of disturbance, so it could have a negative effect as well. It's a very complicated situation. I don't think anybody has the data to really tell the answer there.
Thank you. As well as being potential predators, I think badgers are doing some of the work for your hedgehog conservation because they keep breaking holes in my garden fence on both sides. And the problem, I like to let them come in because I've got amphibians as well that use the holes. And some of it, it's not all solid fencing anyway, but I have to stop my dogs getting out as well. But would someone like to say something about badger predation? I know that when Patrick Barker wrote the book on badgers ages back, he didn't know that, because I spoke to him when the thing was already in press, unfortunately. But I think it might be, Chris alluded to, a serious problem. And so,
shall I start, since you stuck me in it? I think, yeah, I mean, you know, badgers and hedgehogs have been living together for thousands of years in the UK. So I think we have to realise that there are species that can co-occur quite well. I think obviously where you've got other factors like the changing of environment, reduction of the prey base and things like that, then it can affect the coexistence of the species. But I think ultimately you've got to try to develop a strategy where you're maximising British wildlife as best you can. And we're finding in some of the evidence that in London, certain areas badgers have taken over a bit and you don't see hedgehogs. But then other areas like more residential gardens, you see more hedgehogs there. So in the southwest, in the open green spaces, you see some areas with high densities of badgers. So I mean, I think there's room to allow either them to coexist on a bigger scale, where you know one side of the street there are badgers and the other side there are hedgehogs, or you know through greater habitat, diversity of habitat and stuff, they can coexist directly. Any other thoughts?
Well, I think that covers it really well. I think it's important to realise that if you simplify and reduce the habitat to the extent that habitats are now impoverished, then you will throw these sorts of potential conflicts into sharper focus. Whereas if you've got a biodiverse and resilient system, then you've got much more opportunity for coexistence. Otherwise, Chris said it all, I think.
great. Great answer. Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you. Great talks, thank you very much. On the national surveys and the comparison between different times, I'm struggling with numbers. I've got percentages. Are there some overall figures with hard, how many badgers there are, sorry, how many hedgehogs there are in rural areas or urban areas, or just some densities? How many might you get in a square kilometre or 50 hectares or something between the two?
We've got some population estimates that were published as part of the State of Britain's Hedgehogs report. So it was thought that there's fewer than 1 million hedgehogs now in Britain. But the difficult thing with the population estimates is that there's a lot of, you've really got to take those with a pinch of salt. We can't sort of go around and count them, so it's really difficult. And there's a figure from the 1950s that's kind of bandied around quite a lot. There was 36 million hedgehogs in the 1950s. And that's not really based on any kind of surveys or science or anything, but it's one that really the press have really picked up on, and they say, there used to be 36 million, now there's fewer than 1 million. So it's the population change is a better way to kind of to measure what's going on, and hopefully we can get more detailed information with that once we're doing the monitoring programme as well.
Okay, so difference between urban and rural, it's 10 times more per hectare.
Shall I come in?
Yeah, oh yes, actually.
Yes, please.
We do have another expert.
Just need some numbers.
Okay, so there was fewer than 1 million in altogether, and I think about a quarter of those, something about 200,000 or 300,000, were thought to be in urban areas. But again, that's very, very kind of interesting.
Some localised density estimates for a typical suburban area would be 7 times higher than you would get in a typical rural mixed farming landscape. So ordinarily you're looking at, in a suburban area, anything from 20 to 30 hedgehogs per square kilometre, whereas in a rural environment where they were present, you're looking at anything 2 to 7. So in magnitude,
Thank you.
And Glenn, that's a general trend for any kind of species. I think that is good at occupying urban areas, is that when they do occur there, they have much higher densities. So foxes, for example, are much higher densities in urban environments, or suburban environments certainly, than in rural ones. So, and as you know, it's really challenging to come up with population estimates of mammals. And birds are maybe a bit easier, at least population trends, but actual numbers is really tricky. So that's one that Grace mentioned, the National Hedgehog Monitoring Program that we're starting, and that's just to address those sort of questions. Really.
Thank you. I understand it's uncomfortable there.
Very important one.
Thanks. On that topic, first of all, thanks for the great talks. Because you just mentioned, Richard, a lot about suburban population and density estimates, and the state of the British hedgehogs talks about rural versus urban. Where the suburban areas fall in there, like how's the situation there? We say it might be stabilising in urban, still decreasing in rural. How is the situation in suburban, and how does that fit in the state of the British hedgehog? Where does suburban sit in that report?
Suburban areas, they're within the category of urban, is that what you mean?
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Thanks.
Actually, can you just pass?
Hi, just a very brief question about the effectiveness of the activities of hedgehog rescue centres. Is there good data saying they are helping, or just well-intentioned people not having much effect?
I mean, there isn't good data. A recent paper estimated that something in the order of 40,000 plus hedgehogs are brought into rescue centres every year. That was an estimate for 2016, as it happens. But we really don't know whether the efforts of hedgehog rescue workers translate into gains at a population level. You know, we would like to get that evidence through further research and studies, but we don't have that data at the moment. Don't have that evidence. Just to finish on that, sorry, but I mean, with those sorts of numbers passing through rescue centres, it could be a real gain if there is a net positive benefit.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for just one more before we close.
Again, thanks for the great talks, really interesting. There's been a lot of talk about the hedgehog highways by providing access between gardens, but what role does providing access down the side of buildings in suburban areas play, particularly, for example, in side roads, things like that? Is that something that's important to encourage, or do you want to keep the hedgehogs off the roads? How does that fit in?
I mean, from my point of view, we just want to open up as much area as we can. So certainly within that, we would say, you know, if they've got side gates like linking front to back gardens, we'd certainly be encouraging people. I think it's maybe it depends on the area. You know, if you've got a massive road, you know, right next to your garden, it might be that it's kind of not worth opening that up anyway, because you're not going to get a lot of hedgehog traffic. But certainly, I think if you start thinking about, you know, we want hedgehogs to be in this block of houses, but then we don't want them to go over here, and we just want to open up as much area as we can, and then they can kind of move around freely within that, and hopefully that would kind of enable a population to kind of be quite sort of sustainable. And then actually if you lost a few on the roads, obviously as awful that is, it wouldn't kind of affect the population too much. Obviously from a welfare point of view, it's awful, but you know, we want populations to be kind of big and healthy enough that a few lost on, you know, by roadkill wouldn't be the end of the world to the population. So yeah, certainly trying to open up as much as much area as possible, really. I mean, with certain caveats, there might be sort of individual situations where there's something that might prevent that, but usually it would be just open up as much as possible, really.
Yeah, I would just add to that we have put up cameras in those sort of situations, and we have seen quite a few hedgehogs kind of using them as like corridors, and those were particularly on kind of smaller residential roads, where actually a lot of the residents did see them kind of out and about on those. So yeah, I think they're definitely useful for hedgehog movement.
Yeah, and hedgehogs move quite fast through those sorts of areas as well, so they don't have to hang around. They just scoot through to the place they actually want to get to.
Tiny funny story to finish on.
I'll let you tell a little story.
So I used to take my dog for a walk along the riverbank, and on summer nights I would wear flip-flops. And there was just one place on the footpath where you couldn't see the floor properly. And I was always very careful. And one night I thought, oh, what the hell, there's nothing in that shade, there never has been. And I put my foot out in the flip-flop, and there was a hedgehog. What are the chances of that?
Well camouflaged.
So that's a new sorting method we're going to have to try.
Flip-flop.
Okay, thank you. I think these have been fascinating presentations and talks, and you know, I think the work that People's Trust for Endangered Species and the British Hedgehog Preservation Society are doing for hedgehogs in this country is pretty unique. There aren't as many committed charities, organisations with such an interest in mammal species in the UK, and certainly in terms of vertebrates as well. I think you could only probably be rivaled by BTO and RSPB. So well done for that. It's needed, and I think the other thing to point out is the way you're going about delivering the message about hedgehog conservation and asking for engagement with people and wider society. I think this is a very important message and one that's to be commended. And hopefully the result of this is that we will save the nation's favourite animal into the future. And just to highlight to the audience that you can get involved, there are some 121,000 hedgehog champions. There's plenty of room for more. You've seen some of the things you can get involved with, little and large, and I would encourage you to engage with both these charities to support their ongoing work. So thank you for joining us in such good numbers this evening, and finally I'd just like to thank the speakers once more.